have you ever just, stopped and thought about the hidden machinery of our world? Those amazing bits of engineering, of strategy that kind of operate just out of sight. Here at the All Sorts podcast, we really love digging into that stuff, the fascinating, the complex, sometimes the downright surprising. If you get a kick out of those aha moments, if you enjoy sort of peeling back the layers on how things work, then yeah, you're definitely in the right place. So come join our community of curious minds. Take a second, like, share, subscribe to the All Sorts podcast over on YouTube. Seriously, there's a whole library of past deep dives waiting for you there. And you can follow us, keep the conversation going on X, Instagram, and Threads too. Let's press next to force. Like sure today, we're diving into something pretty intense, the world of Russian and U.S. Doomsday Planes. These aren't your everyday passenger jets. We're talking highly classified, airborne command centers, designed for top leadership. Well, the worst possible scenario, nuclear war.
Exactly. They really sit at this fascinating intersection of extreme technology and ultimate contingency planning. And for this exploration, we've pulled together information from a few places. Articles from the Moscow Times, Aeroflap. They give some perspective on both sides. We've also got a pretty detailed CRS report for Congress that digs into the U.S. nuclear command system, plus an article from Simple Flying looking specifically at the Russian L-80, and even an interesting Reddit thread discussing some of its unique features. So our mission today really is to get a handle on the purpose, the capabilities, and the current status of these extraordinary aircraft in both the U.S. and Russia.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. The core concept. Why build these things? I mean, it sounds like a massive undertaking. What problem are they actually trying to solve?
Well, the fundamental problem is ensuring the government can still function, still command its forces, even after a potentially catastrophic nuclear attack. The thinking is pretty stark, really. If your command centers on the ground get taken out, you need a backup, a resilient, mobile one. So these planes become that hub, that place where leaders could orchestrate a response.
Right. Airborne command posts for the absolute worst day imaginable. When did this idea really start taking shape for both the U.S. and Russia?
Okay, so for the United States, it became concrete back in the 1970s. That's when they developed the E-4B Nightwatch. It started as the E-4A, meant to replace the older EC-135J. And interestingly, it uses the same airframe as Air Force One, the Boeing 747-200.
Huh, okay. And the Russians?
Their main counterpart is the Ilyushin Il-80. NATO calls it Maxdome. Sometimes you hear it called the Flying Kremlin. It's believed to have entered service around 1987. It was developed from the Il-86, which was a Soviet-era wide-body passenger jet. And it's important to remember, neither country has a huge fleet of these, just a small number of highly specialized aircraft.
Right, specialized is definitely the word. What kind of features are we talking about? Because you can't just operate normally after a nuclear blast, surely. It's got to be more than just extra radios on a jumbo jet.
Oh, absolutely. The engineering is quite remarkable. Survivability is key. So nuclear hardening is a major one. The U.S. E-4B is specifically hardened against EMP, electromagnetic pulse.
Right, that big energy surge from a nuke that fries electronics.
Exactly. It can just devastate unprotected systems. So the E-4B is shielded against that.
And the Russian Il-80. The sources mentioned its design is, well, visually striking in that regard.
It is, yeah. It takes a very direct approach. The fuselage is almost windowless, except for the cockpit. And even those cockpit windows, particularly the aft ones, have some kind of baffling around them. The idea is pretty clear. Shield the crew and the sensitive equipment inside from the flash, the heat, and the EMP effects. Fewer openings, fewer vulnerability.
That makes sense. A very blunt solution.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're hardened. What about actually doing the command and control? How do they talk to anyone in that kind of chaos?
That's the other critical piece. Advanced communications, both are packed with satellite comms gear. You often see that big hump, that canoe on top of the fuselage. That houses the S8Com antennas. And crucially, both have trailing wire antennas for VLF, very low frequency communication.
VLF, that's for the submarines, right?
Exactly. These antennas can trail for miles behind the plane, and VLF signals are pretty much the only way to reliably reach ballistic missile submarines when they're deep underwater. The E-4B specifically has a whole suite: VHF, UHF for shorter ranges, AHF for satellite links, and of course VLF. Plus, data links, secure comms, even a phone exchange, computers, data processing. It's a flying command center in every sense.
Wow. So they can reach out across the spectrum, even down into the oceans. But how long can they stay up there? A crisis wouldn't exactly be over in an hour.
Right. Endurance is absolutely vital. Both are designed for sustained flight. The general talk is potentially up to 2 weeks, assuming they can get refueled in the air.
2 weeks. Aerial refueling, both are capable. The Il-80 uses a probe system. The U.S. E-4B uses the probe and drogue method, the basket trailing from the tanker.
Yeah.
And that U.S. system can apparently transfer fuel pretty quickly, something like 470 gallons a minute, based on one of the sources.
That's incredible. 2 weeks airborne. What about the people? How many crew does it take to run one of these things?
Well, the E-4B has a huge crew capacity, up to 112 people. That's actually the largest crew of any aircraft in the U.S. Air Force.
112 people, okay.
Yeah. For the Russian Il-80, the exact number isn't public, but you can bet it requires a large, highly skilled team to manage all those complex systems.
You mentioned the Il-80's lack of windows. Any other weird external features that make it stand out?
Yeah. Besides the windows, it only keeps 2 of the original Il-86 doors and only 1 air stair door instead of 3.
Oh.
But the most obvious things are probably those 2 big pods under the wings inboard of the engine.
Pods. What are they for? They're electrical generator pods. Apparently quite large, maybe 32 feet long, 4 feet across. They even have their own landing lights built into them. And someone on that Reddit thread pointed out what looks like an external fuel pipe running along the side, which is unusual.
Definitely sounds unique. Now, one of our sources, the Moscow Times, mentioned something pretty wild involving the Il-80. A theft. Seriously.
It does sound a bit like a spy movie, doesn't it? But yes, December 2020, reports came out that equipment worth about 1 million rubles, maybe $13,600 US back then, was stolen. Stolen while the plane was undergoing maintenance in Taganrog.
Okay, wait. Stolen from inside one of these planes. What did they take?
The initial reports were a bit vague, but RNTV, a Russian channel, said it was radio equipment. Apparently, thieves got the cargo hatch open. Investigators found shoe prints, fingerprints. Around 12 people were questioned. There was even talk that maybe people with access to the airfield might have been involved.
Wow. And the Kremlin called it an emergency situation. That sounds serious.
It was taken seriously, yes. Putin's spokesman, Peskov, vowed they'd take steps to make sure it didn't happen again. It definitely raised eyebrows about security around such a critical asset.
I bet. What did the military analysts think? Was it a major breach, or... The opinions seemed mixed.
They were, yeah. One expert, Mikhail Kononok, suggested the thieves were probably just after scrap metal value from the old Soviet-era radios, which, sadly happens. But he also warned it was still a potential, highly classified data leak. Another analyst, Vasily Kashin, kind of downplayed it, calling it basically theft of old Soviet-era metal scrap. But then Pavel Felgenhauer gave a starker view, suggesting losing that specific gear might have actually rendered the plane unusable. So yeah, opinions varied, but it highlights how sensitive even older parts can be on these platforms.
Okay, let's switch back to the U.S. side for a minute. That CRS report talks about the broader Nuclear Command and Control System, the NCCS. The E-4B isn't working alone, right?
Not at all. It's a crucial piece, but it's part of a much bigger, more complex system. The NCCS, this whole infrastructure, supports the president, the commanders in directing nuclear forces. You've got key ground sites, the National Military Command Center, NMCC, at the Pentagon, U.S. Strategic Command's Operations Center, Site R, which is an alternate bunker, and then the mobile parts like the E-4B, which is the National Airborne Operations Center, or NEOC, and also the E-6B Mercury.
The E-6B, that's different again.
Yeah, the E-6B has distinct roles. It acts as an airborne launch control system for ICBMs, and it does the TACAMO mission, Take Charge and Move Out, which is that vital link to the ballistic missile submarines.
So it's layers upon layers, redundancy built in everywhere.
Yeah.
What does this whole system need to be able to do fundamentally?
Well, several absolutely vital things. Constantly monitoring the global situation, providing warning if missiles are launched, assessing attacks, supporting the top leaders in making those incredibly tough decisions, getting presidential orders out securely and quickly to the forces, and managing forces that are spread all over the place. And through all that, the key words are survivability, reliability, security. It has to withstand blast, heat, fallout, EMP, maybe even chemical or biological attacks, and it has to work. Every time, securely, no room for error.
That CRS report also mentioned the 2001 Nuclear Posture Review changing things.
Yeah.
How did that affect command and control?
Right, the 2001 NPR, it really put command, control, intelligence, and planning right at the center of what they called a new triad. That triad was offensive forces, defensive systems, and this responsive infrastructure, which heavily involves C2 systems. It signaled a shift towards a more integrated approach, linking offense, defense, and the C2 needed to manage them adaptively against new threats. Better integration of nuclear and conventional planning, too.
And the U.S. has been upgrading these flying command posts.
Oh, yes. Ongoing modernization for both the E-4B and E-6B. Things like Digital audio, better secure comms, adding local area networks, new radios, navigation upgrades for the E-4B. The E-6B has seen similar work, new cockpit displays, nav gear, comms upgrades, plus checks to make sure the airframes themselves can keep flying safely. And looking further out, the Air Force has started the SAOC program Survivable Airborne Operations Center. That's basically the project to find a replacement for the aging E-4B fleet.
Okay. What about Russia? Are they upgrading their L-80s or planning replacements too?
Well, the sources suggest the current IL-80s probably won't get major upgrades before they retire, but Russia's looking ahead. The plan seems to be using the Ilyushin Il-96-400M as the basis for their next-gen Doomsday plane. That's a more modern, larger jet, kind of the successor to the IL-86 the current plane is based on. And they actually rolled out the first prototype of that Il-96-400Mer back in June 2023, so they're definitely working on keeping that capability going.
It's kind of strange thought, but do these planes, designed for the absolute apocalypse, ever get used for anything else? Anything less grim?
That's a good point, and yes, they sometimes do. The U.S. E-4B, for instance, has been used to support FEMA during natural disasters. It flew missions during Hurricane Opal back in '95, providing command and communication links. And the NMCC on the ground also helps coordinate responses to things like hurricanes or earthquakes. After 9/11, these kinds of command assets were used to help manage the return of air traffic. President Bush used one during Hurricane Rita, too. So, yes, the robust, secure communication or coordination abilities they have are actually valuable in other major crises, not just nuclear war.
Right. Okay, so let's try and pull the main threads together from today's deep dive.
Sure. We've seen how both the U.S. and Russia maintain these really unique doomsday planes. They're critical parts of their nuclear command strategies, engineered specifically to let leaders keep control even if the worst happens. The U.S. is actively upgrading its current fleet, the E-4B and E-6B, and planning for the next generation with SAOC. Russia seems to be phasing out the IL-80, but is developing its replacement based on the newer IL-96-400 Namens. And that theft incident with the IL-80, while maybe focused on scrap, really highlights just how sensitive these assets are. So these planes, kind of hidden in plain sight, really represent this nexus of high technology, strategic thinking, and the ongoing reality of the nuclear age.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? When you consider the sheer resources, the technology poured into these planes, what does their continued existence really tell us about where we still are in the nuclear age, about the absolute need for command and control if the unthinkable happens? And looking forward, as technology changes so fast, cyber threats, new weapons, AI, how will these flying command centers have to evolve to stay relevant, to stay survivable? Something to think about. The world is just full of these incredible, complex stories, and here at the All Sorts podcast, that's what we love to uncover. If this dive into doomsday planes got you thinking, imagine what else you'll find with us. Don't keep it to yourself. Share this deep dive with someone you think would find it fascinating. Definitely head over to the All Source Podcast on YouTube, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next exploration, and check out our back catalog. A lot more good stuff there. And please connect with us. Share your thoughts on X, Instagram, Threads. Your engagement, your curiosity, that's what keeps us going. Together we can keep exploring all sorts of fascinating things.